Hello, thank you for attending our webinar today. 30 minutes can save you days on your JDE financial close process. My name is Adam Krieger, founder of Preferred Strategies, and I'll be walking you through today's presentation. A little bit of background about myself. I used to work for a JD Edwards customer in the finance department, heavily involved in the month-end close process, not necessarily in the day-to-day importing journal entries, but definitely as it comes to the reporting side and the annual budgeting process. So I have a little bit of familiarity what most companies are dealing with at month end. So a little bit about ourselves. For the last 17 years, we've been dedicated to BI and helping companies on their journey to become data-driven. We've got about 20 people in the company scattered across the North America, with about 200 customers scattered across the globe. But really, we look to find companies that value data as much as we do and are looking to really improve and hone their processes to become more productive, think smarter, and just get better in their daily activities, which comes to month-end close. So again, what does it really mean to be a data-driven organization? This is something that everybody kind of thinks of maybe differently. But really, we like to consider this, empower the business user to find and use the enterprise information that's most valuable to them. So when we get into the demonstration today, we're going to be focusing on a few different ways of how users can access month-end information around financials that hopefully will be a compelling way for them to kind of reduce some of the either manual work or just even providing more governance and trust in the data based on what you'll see. Really, with QuickLaunch, there's a few different flavors, and we'll kind of walk through the different examples as different type of use cases and users. But on the surface, we're translating the JDE Edwards data from its cryptic structure into a much more business-friendly format. So of the 4,000 tables in JDE Edwards, we're only really using about 150 or so in the 15 modules of JDE Edwards that we currently deliver with QuickLaunch. So instead of seeing table names in the system like F0101, you'll see address, or MCMCU, you'll say business unit. The dates are stored and converted from a Julian to a Gregorian format. The decimal precision will be put in place. If you're on an offset calendar, like something like 445 or 544, or your fiscal year ends in July or September, those you need, and if you have multiple companies on different calendars, we support all that out of the box. And when we get into the demonstration and we're looking at things like month to date, quarter to date, year to date, it's all based on your fiscal and dynamic calculation on that. We call those time-based measures. We'll talk about a little bit later. And then things like category codes. So instead of seeing just generic category code names, you'll see based on what's in your data dictionary or what you want to override your data dictionary with in your model. So. We also have, as I mentioned, a few different flavors and a couple things just to point out as we get into the live demonstration. First, on the left here in the data preparation step, we really can do a direct connect, or we call an ODS, operational data store, or optimized data store, as well as the enterprise data warehouse. And there's a few different technical details, but regardless, the same prior screen where we translate the data from JDE, we do it just a little bit different ways within the plumbing of QuickLaunch based on the customer preference or use case or requirement. So we work with you to understand what's best fit for your organization, and that's what gets deployed. But in the middle here is what I really want to focus on, because in the data modeling, this is how we ease the development and the experience and gain adoption, because it's complicated if a customer says, want to know building a trial balance, and I want to break it down by some different maybe category codes or a business unit or company and combined with an account, and maybe it's the object and object.subsidiary. So all these different fields are in different places and different tables that have to be joined together, and to get a trial balance, you need measures. So that would be like a actual amount. Maybe you want this to be an Inception-to-Date amount, maybe my year-to-date actual, in the actual versus budget report, you now have to then apply things like ledger type. So there's all this logic, and so what this model does is it buys different called perspectives. There'll be a perspective for general ledger, maybe one for accounts payable, accounts receivable, and they'll have already organized the applicable fields and tables and elements that you need for different types of reports in those different modules of JDE Edwards per se. And these measures become governed metrics. So this is where everybody knows the model is accurately calculating, let's say, gross profit. So if someone's trying to build a decision, knowing that the gross profit came from the data model, that it's a governed field that people can be confident and have trust in that data. So the key is all the demonstration you'll see here in the next couple of minutes around financial close, all built on top of the data model. But we're going to show you not just, Power BI as one example. We do have Power BI. That's probably the main reason why companies explore preferred strategies in QuickLaunch, because they want to leverage the new best-in-class modern BI with Power BI. But we'll also show you Excel connected to the model, and even some web-based deliverable reports for income statements and balance sheets, what's called reporting services within the Microsoft suite. So again, lastly, before we dive into the hands-on demonstration, we've got, normally we do a demo that's not focused around month-end close, and we'll start with logging in to Power BI as a CFO, looking at some financial ratios and KPIs. Then we might look at, how to analyze some Power BI reports and dashboards around the GL, maybe sales, something like that. And then we can come back and show maybe some web-based delivered drillable reports, P&Ls and balance sheets, and then how we can interact and things within Excel itself. But for this, we're going to kind of do the reverse. So we're going to start in Excel, do a little more ad hoc, and then we'll kind of build those other layers down to the end user, executive experience with some KPIs. So I look forward to the next session here. We're going to get started right now on going to Excel. All right, so now that we're in Excel, we want to start by just doing a little bit more of an ad hoc experience with pivot tables around the financial information at month end, and then we'll actually go in and show maybe some formatted reports that can also be accomplished here within Excel. So here I've got a connection to our model. So if we go up here to data and look at connections, we've already connected to our data model for AP, AR, and GL as examples. It's as quickly and easy enough to just go, if we didn't have a connection, to get data from database analysis services, pick the server, pick the location, enter the credentials, and basically the way that we'd authenticate typically would be leveraging your Windows Active Directory account. But that's probably more technical details that we need to get into. One point is, so if you're familiar with pivot tables, you're probably used to seeing, you got filters, columns, rows, and values, and here's in essence the GL data model. So before we dive in and start slicing and dicing data, let's just kind of point out what's here a little bit. So within these tables, this is our general ledger perspective, our general ledger element of our model. So we'll have things like the account. This would be based on primarily your 901 with related to maybe some other tables. Here we've got the account description, the object account description, object.subsidiary description, and so forth. So we have also under reporting levels, this is where in the model we've already built out those nested levels. We can kind of come back and take a peek at that in a moment, where we've got the, on the balance sheet side, where you break down assets versus liability and equity. Assets might break down then by current assets, long-term assets, and then you might break down the next level, maybe cash, AR, and so forth. So these row level type groupings of accounts are already addressed in the model. It's part of our setup for every client, because each customer is unique in how they do that. And those could be based on account groupings, it could be based on category codes, it could be based on level of detail. So depending on how you want to enforce and utilize those roll-ups are pretty much addressed custom to you. We also have things like the business unit. So the fields on the business unit master, some cat codes, maybe like region, division, and so forth. So we'll have some of those accounts, but you'll also notice things like the address, the asset, the document type. So the reason for that is that in this model, we're blending together the 911 for actual activity plus the 902 for maybe other activity that's either more historical that we want to pull in detail, or also other ledger types that may not exist in the 911. So because we're pulling the 911, which is your general ledger, we can then relate to all those other types of categories, and all those other types, we call them dimensions for objects. Things, again, like the the asset number, the subledger, and so forth. Down here under GL balances, again, if we were to pull in, we've got things like the GL date exclamation remark, batch date, GL date, and so forth. So we can pull those details. And so if you think about what we're going to be able to show you in a pivot table is kind of like having your account ledger inquiry in JDE Edwards on steroids. So you could slice and dice that account ledger inquiry however you different ways you wanted to. If I go up here to the measures, you'll notice we've also grouped some measures, things like account measures, actual, budget. So if I look at like actual to simplify, we've got actual amount, inception, ITD for inception to date, month to date, quarter to date, year to date, total year, the balance forward, right? The prior month to date, the prior period inception to date. We've got, prior year, month to date. So all these variations of these measures that already build in the logic of not just a ledger type per se, but also then a time-based nature that as the user picks period and year, and you'll see this work in just a moment, that it's going to change and recalculate on the fly these values. And the reason why that's important is that we talk about how do we shave and how do we reduce the time. We're not running in JDE Edwards a bunch of reports, exporting into Excel. We're not just, again, taking static data and then now manipulating that for my month-end close. We're actually connecting to data that might be up to date from, the last refresh of that data model. We didn't really talk about that, but that data model can be refreshed, let's say, every hour. And you can have maybe parts of the model, like the GL, be refreshed at different intervals, maybe every 30 minutes. You can also refresh it on demand and month-end close. So let's kind of take a peek at, one more thing. We got actuals, budgets, account measures, things like revenue, gross profit, net income, expenses. When we're looking at maybe expenses, we've got, again, month to date, quarter to date, year to date, percentage of revenue, or just amounts, month to date, quarter to date, year to date, actuals versus budgets, and so forth. And we got variances down here at the bottom. So if you think about it, we've got about 500 of these calculated measures sitting on top of, in this data model, dynamically calculated on top of JDE Edwards. What's happening when we reload this data, it's actually storing a copy of the data for in memory. And this is, a highly performant in-memory database called Analysis Services. And now we're going to slice and dice all of that data. So the nice thing is everything you're going to see in the next few minutes, there's no hit back to JDE Edwards as we're analyzing this, right? So if you think about a traditional report in JDE Edwards, you kick off a report, it goes out there based on the filters of the report, the data selection, runs a query, brings back the result for that one report. In a month-end close, you might have 50 reports. So you're going to basically execute 50 different reports to go out there, get the data they need. Conceptually, what's happening is we refresh this data model, and all those 50 reports by default are all updated dynamically, and they're as up to date as just the data flowing into that model. Okay. So let's start with this, keep it simple. So if we want to look up here, and maybe I want to bring in, I'll go up to and grab our account first. So let's say I want my object account and description. I'll just bring that to my rows. Okay. And it's going to go ahead and prompt me to log in here. So let me go ahead and, this is connected to our sample model in the cloud. So okay. So it's going to establish the connection there. Now it's going to go ahead and bring back the results. So in this pivot table, I've now got object account and description. If we go up here to our GL balances detail, go to our actuals, right? And I can go ahead and bring in, here's our actual maybe year to date, okay? So this will actually bring back and say, okay, here's all of those actual amount year to date calcs, okay? So let's go ahead, before you think about it, okay, well, what does that mean? How is it calculating year to date? And that's because this dynamic calc in our model is going in and saying, okay, I'm going to actually, based on the max date or what the user selects in their calendar. So if I go to the calendar, and I'm going to go down here, go to say year period, I'll just bring that to my filters. And up here, we can go ahead and select, pick on a period and year. Maybe I'll grab 2019 period 9. Okay, and choose OK. So this is going to recalculate based on 2019 period 9. I could have made that a slicer. So instead of having it as a filter in the pivot table, it could be a slicer. Lots of different things you could do. So So now, while that's calculating, we can kind of see, we'll add some more structure to that. Let me go in and say, okay, well, we also have some other measures, maybe like the expense. So if we want to look at maybe our account measures and go to our expenses, and we've got a pre-canned actual expense year to date. So you'll notice that these are all blank here because these are all basically balance sheet accounts. Now, when we get down to just the accounts that are applicable to expenses is where we actually see values for that next column. And for the sake of the demo here, I'll just get rid of actual amount for a second. So right now we're just looking at just expenses. So this would basically say, okay, here's what our total expenses are actual year to date. Let's go ahead and compare those to maybe our budget. So bring our budget year to date, okay? And we can look at even down here, maybe we've got a variance to budget year to date, and maybe a percent, okay? So this is one example. We're getting this breakdown by object account, but let's say, okay, we want to see that by business unit first. So now we can go back to our business unit and bring our business unit description. Let's bring that below the object account. Okay, so now we can see within each object account, let me collapse that real quick. And I can pick on an object account, we can see the breakdown of that. So if I look at maybe, advertising, right, 429,000, we can expand that. Now it's going to break it down by all those business units that might roll into advertising. Or we could say, you know what, I don't want to actually drill in from the object account to the business unit. Maybe I want to drill to the business unit down to the object account, right? So now if I switch that around, collapse that again, right? Now we're actually starting at a business unit, and then we can drill down, from the business unit to the object account within each one, okay? So just because we can kind of switch these around, we can also go in and well, I'll do a couple things, then I'll do a little bit more dynamic example here. Well, maybe we'll flip this to like a period trend, or a period by month consolidated or consolidating kind of flavor. But let's go ahead first and say, I'm going to get rid of business unit again. Let's go back to object just to make it a little more clear. And if we want to look at maybe these by, region, right, or division, so I could take a cat code, right? So we can actually see some of these broken down by those. And if I go back and look at just actual amounts, let's get rid of these for a moment, year to date, and maybe I want that division to be a column. Right, so now we can see, okay, here's all of our expenses broken down by object account, and here's our different, columns for each of our divisions as an example, right? Or let's go back and bring in our year period down as our column, right? And let's just maybe go back to add a year as our filter. Okay, so we go down to our calendar year, and this is where we can go ahead and just pick 1 year as an example, or maybe a couple of years if we wanted. So now for 2019, it's going to go ahead and filter down. I can see here's my breakdown of each of those expenses by month for 2019. Right. So again, with a pivot table, the key is that and a lot of companies use pivot tables, but their process typically is run a report somewhere, export the data to Excel, and then turn it into a pivot table. Right. What are the challenges with that? Well, if you need to export a data set that's more than 1 million rows, you might have a problem with that, right? The other is once you start bringing lots of data into a spreadsheet, it gets sluggishly slow. And with this is that that data is stored in memory in the model. So even though right now we're actually looking at this, we've only got 50 columns, there could be 20 million records, there could be 100 million records of data sitting in this cube. And we're basically, as we're just clicking around, it's querying the cube and back. So it's that quick and easy to kind of get some results out of it. The other thing that's nice is that if I want to see what makes up these details, right, let's go and look at maybe maintenance and repair for this month. I can go ahead and double click on that. It's going to drill me down to all those transaction details, okay? So this report that we have, right, is one example. And if we look at real quickly, I'm going to go back to swap out my expense here. So let me bring my measures here and switch this back to just a straight actual amount. Let's say year to date as an example. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and make this again. And let's go back to where we were. Sorry, double efforts. And let's go back to period 9. Okay. So if we're bringing, let's say, our year-to-date, we obviously could do month-to-date, quarter-to-date, year-to-date, but bring actual year-to-date, go to our budget, year-to-date, okay, budget amount, year-to-date, and we can obviously create the variance and also. So if we look at this now, we also have, let's say we want to build a P&L, okay, or balance sheet, right? So if we were to come in here, with balance sheet, we'd actually do inception to date. So let's just build a P&L real quick. So one of the things that we have as well when we look at our account, we create a custom field called report type. So what this will do is it'll let you say, okay, if I know I want to build only an expense report or something, maybe just a P&L, not a balance sheet, I can select income statement. It'll filter down to just those rows that meet that criteria. And then if you think about it, okay, let's go look at those financial roll-ups. So like IS level 1, 2, 3, 4. So when I bring those in above object account, you'll start seeing some shape like net income. Okay, those all roll to net income. Let me collapse that. Right, and then if I bring in, the next level down below 2, right, and let me expand that. So now net income, we've got income before taxes, we bring in level 3, right? So now income before taxes, now we see income from operations, right? Other income, bring in level 4. And now we can go into look at income from operations and see that by gross profit and SG&A, right? And then we bring in level 5. Okay, so you can kind of get this sense of, now we get revenue and cost of sales and can keep going. So these different nested levels are things that are part of the model that we build out for you. So you already, and we use those in the more formatted reports we'll show you in just a moment. But you notice here that this is got revenues as negative values and our expenses are positive. And that's because in this example, your credits in JDE Edwards are stored as a negative value where your debits would be positive. So what we want to do in this scenario is maybe reverse the sign on those. So in our model, we have an example here to reverse the sign display. I'll bring that into my filters. We can go up here and turn this into a reverse sign in thousands. I'll just reverse the sign. And now we'll see our revenue showing as positive, as well as our net income, right? So all of those roll up, the net income, the incomes, the gross profits will all show as positive values. We can actually go ahead and show these, groupings, the headers on the bottom and so forth. But you'll notice this is not really the best tool. A pivot table is not the best tool to build a financial, right? So in, a couple things we'll get over to show some formatted financials in Excel here in just a moment. Before we do, I just also want to point out, we do as part of our out-of-box in the model, we calculate as of agings for AP and AR. So when you're in your either month-end close or just in general want to go back in time, so in this case, we just put up AR aging 2017 period 6. This was the aging at that time. If I wanted to expand one of these like Clearview specialties, it'll expand to these are in essence the document numbers that actually are there. And if I want to go ahead and double click on one of those, it'll take me just like we did before, drill down to that detail. So one thing about our model is, though, even though it's in memory, we are pulling millions, and some customers hundreds of millions of records again in the model, and we're doing some calculated, pretty heavy-duty logic within it. So moving forward, some customers might say, you know what, I definitely want to do my financials in Excel, right? Even though a lot of companies are going away from that, it's still for some what their preference and what their comfort is. And so our thought is, if you're going to build your financials in Excel, let's not make it a manual process, right? So this is an example where that model's refreshed with data, let's say every hour, and I can show you again, we'll refresh it on demand in a few minutes. But as soon as that data model has the current data set in it, by default, all my financials are done. So here's an example. We've got a flavor of a P&L that's a per unit. So you got, it's formatted. You'll notice in this case, because it's a different way, it's not a pivot table. And the reason why it's not a pivot table is that if I expand, let's say revenue here, you'll see an account. And if I click on that, you'll notice that there's actually what's a function in here, which is interesting because it's actually a cube value function. We're referencing elements within our data model, like the field you saw a few minutes ago, actual amount, month to date. We're breaking it down, picking the user pick a year and period, and then based on the change in the period and year, it'll go recalculate this P&L on the fly, okay, based on what's in the data in the model. So it's not a manual process, and we know that because this is pulling all these values from the model itself, that we've got that governed source of truth and that comfort and confidence in the data. If I show you here, you can see this is in this example, we were telling this row to be based on the object account range from 5010, and this could be 5010 to 5015, or we could also base this on category codes. So again, however you build your row structure is supported by QuickLaunch and preferred strategies. So go ahead and hide that again. So to keep forward here, here's an example of an income statement per unit. Maybe here's a percentage of sales. You could add a slicer, so you could pick a different division or region and automatically go out there and query and refilter the data back. So you don't have to have, in essence, 10 different tabs, one for computing, one for corporate admin, one for home appliances. I can make that dynamic and let the user kind of recalculate that on the fly on demand there. So this is in essence a month to date, year to date, actual versus budget with a percentage of sales instead of a per unit if you're not really doing and selling things that have quantities per se. Here's maybe a breakdown where it's income statement by period, right? So here we've got similar set of row structure. Here's the breakdown by period. If we keep moving to the right, maybe we also get a lot of customers. Well, we also need to do consolidating. So we kind of showed you this in the pivot table, but again, this is without the pivot table in a formatted flavor. Here's an example where we've got, in essence, consolidating P&L broken down by our same thing we've shown before as division. And then here's like a balance sheet. Okay, so in the balance sheet, we can see assets, current assets, the breakdown there. So again, you can do financials in Excel, and we're going to show you other places you can do financials. But again, if that's your comfort, but you want governance and you want to cut out, hours, if not days of effort. We've got some customers that do their financials in Excel. They still spend, once they've closed the books, it takes them still, hours to get all the data consolidated. And then if it happens is they get 3 hours into a manual process and all of a sudden says, oh, wait, got to get this journal entry in and got to do it all over again, right? So this is the best way to reduce the time as well as provide that comfort and governance because again, the data model is controlling what the data gets to the spreadsheet. So now we're going to move on to the next example of how to analyze some financial operating statements. So we wanted to get into now is another way to look at analyzing some of these financials. And so what we're looking at here is you'll notice it's a web browser portal. We've got reporting services here, which is also Power BI report server, two different portals within the Microsoft suite that you can kind of deliver some reporting services type reports if you're familiar with the Microsoft reporting suite. So we use this for really the paginated, formatted type reports where you've got a lot of conditional suppression, conditional logic. One thing to point out is that because these reports are built off the data model, just like anything that's built in Excel or Power BI, it's the same values, same elements being shared either way. So first off, if I want to look at one of these, I can let's say grab the income statement and it'll open up this report here on the fly. So this is now, I'm in a web browser. We can, from here, again, view the report. We've made some dynamic changes up here, like, let me increase our zoom a little bit. Run this by year and by period. I want to calculate either month to date or quarter to date here, year to date, actual versus budget or actual versus prior year. Budget. So you can make it dynamic where in a traditional financial report, like consolidated or by company, where you normally might have different versions, right? Oh, I got to run these 8 versions of a report. So, that might still have a use case. You can still build 8 separate reports, or you can kind of make this more dynamic with some drop downs and parameters. I'm in a web browser. This report could actually have a URL associated with it that I could email to somebody so they could view it in a browser if we want them to not be viewing it inside of a format like Excel or PowerPoint. Or PowerPoint or sorry, PDF. But you can go ahead and save these out to those formats, and they actually come out really nicely formatted as well if you wanted to have those run to those formats. But one of the things I wanted to point out was, if I'm looking at this, I've got sales and marketing expenses. Let's drill down on that. Just like you were seeing in Excel, we can go in here and look at something like maybe rent expense or maintenance and repair. And if I open up rent expense, again, it's going to break down. These are the different accounts that roll into that bucket. Right? I can pick on one of those, maybe drill down, And again, it'll take me down to the GL transactions here inside of a browser as well. So this is just another flavor of some financial reports that can be done in a browser with reporting services. This is a checkbox when we load up our QuickLaunch. Do you want these paginated income statements and balance sheets set up to your criteria? If you want to refresh, let's say I'm the controller and I basically just posted journal entry and I know the cube isn't going to load up again for another 30 minutes or half or to an hour or whatever it is based on the schedule that's been defined. And you have that schedule be varying in your month end close. Maybe you have things running more frequently. Maybe some things might run less frequently, outside of that. And all different parts of the cube. The cube, as we're talking about, has a general ledger, AP, AR, sales, inventory, procurement, manufacturing. And so you could have those different pieces. I'm gonna go ahead and run this job here. So it'll run for a few seconds while we're talking. But in essence, when you load up the data model, let's see, did I run that? Is it already done? Oh, so let me go ahead there. Now it's running. So again, just as now, if you think about it, it's like when you go out there and you post a journal entry and you want to rerun a P&L or balance sheet in the traditional fashion, you might run a report, right? If I need 10 reports, I'm running in 10 reports, 10 queries, all hitting the data. In this case, I'm refreshing the data model. And when this is completed, right, all of a sudden now all 50 reports, all 10 reports, all 500 reports, all Power BI dashboards, all of those elements that have the GL element to them, or any of the refreshed elements, will now be available, with the updated data in it. So that's kind of how a user, and we can kind of set this up so you determine on your team who has the ability to refresh what elements, and you can then customize who can refresh what within the data model itself. So that's an example of how we can use some paginated reports with Microsoft reporting services with quick launch content available for customers. Now we want to take a look at analyzing month-end financial operating information with Power BI, right? So normally, again, this would be where we normally start our demo, but because of the nature of month-end close process, we thought let's start from the Excel and then go into reporting services and now end with the Power BI example. So I'm actually logged into Power BI in the service, and you'll notice here I'm at the General Ledger workspace. You'll notice in the dashboard there's a GL dashboard, right? So at each workspace there's dashboards, there might be reports, workbooks you can publish out there, data sets, you can certify certain data sets. We can kind of get into a whole discussion around kind of how this all works. But let me go to this report and go to this General Ledger example. Now this is going to open up. Again, if you think about what we were looking at earlier in a P&L, so the financial income statement, and some customers have detailed P&Ls or income statements that might be tens of pages long, right? Lots of down to each detail, object, account, and subsidiary. And in this case, we're looking at, okay, is Power BI the best tool to analyze a 50-page report in table detail? It could probably do it to some degree, but not format in the way you want, not making it very easy for the granular type, traditional list type reports. But there isn't a way to use this tool for that. What we're looking at here is how do we take those key elements of a P&L? So an income statement has revenue, gross profit, net income, what's my margin percent? And now we can say, okay, if we take some of those key measures and analyze the data from that, does it tell me the story quicker? Does it help me find what I need to better? And so this is one of our out-of-box sample reports in Power BI as part of Quick Launch. You'll notice I'm going to go through some different tabs. This first one here, we've got a few examples of CAT codes. These would be tailored to your CAT codes, region, division, product line, or segment, or territory, or manager, or whatnot. And then here you can see this is consolidated. So I can go ahead and select a different period. It'll recalculate on the fly based on picking a different period, right? But in this case, we've also got a comparison, each of these measures or these KPIs for, the comparison to, budget and prior year. And if I'm better than both of my targets, I'll be green. If I'm worse than both my targets, I'll be red. And if I'm in between my two targets, I'll be yellow. So consolidated, I can kind of tell, see how I'm doing. I'm doing pretty good. If I go and look at maybe West as an example, right? West, I'm actually doing pretty good as well. If I go to Northeast, you'll notice in Northeast, okay, I've got some different stuff going on here. So my margin percent is slightly down. My revenues year to date are up, more so better than both my budget and prior year. However, my net income year to date is actually better than prior year, but it's still less than my budget, right? So when you blend a mix and match of the type of KPI with a time-based element of month to date, quarter to date, year to date, right? It helps kind of, flush out that story of where you might have some issues. So, in Cindy comments, because this is a one-page view, we can click on, okay, look at East. Well, let's just look at East for home appliances, right? So by selecting both of those, it's going to filter down. So this is a nice way, in a traditional report where you're doing a P&L by region, division, and product line, it might be one page for each of those in itself. So you might end up having, that's how you get to, tens of pages. So that's one tab, key metrics tab. Our next one will go to, let's say, GL summary, where in this we can kind of see a breakdown of those same key metrics, but now we're looking at them more visually. This is a data visualization tool, Power BI, so you can kind of see things charted. We can kind of drill down on things. I can flip it now from month to date, maybe to quarter to date, or maybe looking at year to date, and we can kind of see these charts kind of change that way. If I go to the next tab and look at maybe revenue, right? We have a whole dedicated tab. How are the ways we want to analyze revenue? But the key is that, these are a sample report. When we map these get all mapped over your data, but you can then tweak them, right? Based on, again, how you would want to analyze revenue or profit, and so forth. So I want to kind of just click through, we've got a tab here, revenue, gross profit, expenses, net income. Let's take a peek here at the expenses. So if I'm looking at this visually, and we've got here some things going on. This is built off of our tabular data model, which has those governed metrics and confidence in the data. So here we've got an actual, because I'm looking at 2019 period 9 year to date. This is calculated dynamically. I've got $7.4 million in spend or expenses year to date through those criteria, which is more expenses than my budget year to date and more than my prior year to date, okay, which is why I'm showing this as red. This other projected calc, what this is doing, it's a dynamic calculation that we've added to our data model. So what you can do is calculate, from JDE outwards, 9 months of actuals. So in this case, this calc in 9.7 is 9 months of actuals, or year-to-date actuals plus remaining months budget. So if I hit my budget for the remaining months of the year, I'm going to end up at 9.7 million. So if I go back to period 6, right, you'll see this would have been 6 months of actuals plus 6 months of budget. So that would have been 9.1 in that example. So this is just a quick way without, pulling a different forecast for different ledger type for a forecast, which you could do, and we can, that could be brought in and those other ledger types. But because this is a visual report, this is a waterfall chart. Normally you'd have, groupings that are maybe better than the target. So in this case, I'm showing all of these in this waterfall as red. If I mouse over sales and marketing expenses, I can see I'm actually $400,000 or $398,000 worse. Spent more in actuals in my budget, and then I can see compared to prior year as well. So the key when you're in visualizing data with a tool like Power BI is ask the question why. Why am I over budget 398,000? What could be causing that, right? How do I figure out? And because of the nature of being able to just drag and drop, and I can drill down. So now if I drill down to this, here we can go and say, okay, these are now the object accounts. Now we could have had that drill down to the business unit, right? I can still do that probably now. Or so you could determine how, when you analyze this data, you want to be able to drill down to get to the result. So if I look over here at maybe, miscellaneous expenses, I've got $285,000 of miscellaneous expense. I want to know why, right? So we can again right click on that, drill down maybe to the business unit, or I can drill through to the transactions. So just like we were showing in some of the other tools, regardless of what tool you're using, if the functionality is there, you can drill down to that most granular detail. Again, think about JDE Edwards inquiry screens on steroids, pivoting them any way you want, visualizing them any way you want. So all that data is the same grain that we're bringing in. You can see here the 285,000 with a document number, the explanation, the GL date, and so forth. So that's an example how you can still have users answering their questions being more efficient, and then being able to see the data much easier and quicker with this type of solution than they might in a traditional report. Okay. So if we go moving on, we also have maybe net income. We've got here's maybe a year over year. Maybe it's a pivot table. We can then drill down, right? Or maybe we're actually showing our kind of pivot. We've got revenue, gross profit, net income as our columns, drilling down through our different rows and groupings of by category codes and so forth. Actual year over year, actual versus budget, or maybe even doing some type of interactive pivot table, right? So now we can say, okay, here is by object account with our actual compared to prior year, our variance, our budget, and prior variance. So we want to look at this. Well, let's just take a look at maybe I want to look at just SG&A expenses, right? So we can go ahead and filter on SG&A expenses. We can actually filter on maybe just SG&A expenses for the Eastern region, right? So, we can go ahead and select these different slicers and automatically filter the data. We can look at these. This is now year to date, but what if I want this for month to date? So now we can kind of see this by month to date instead of year to date, okay? If I wanted to go and edit this report, maybe I want to make a change to it. So if I choose edit, right, now you'll notice that when I'm in here, oh, I didn't even realize it had drill, but if I were to drill into this and say, okay, I can drill into maybe some of these accounts here, regular pay, let's drill down on that, right? So now it's going to drill down in this case to basically the different divisions, right? Let's pick a division and drill down to, maybe in this case, the subdivision, right? So you can actually go and so if I drill back up here for a second, this is where that ad hoc nature of Power BI, we can go in here. Let me just duplicate this page. So if I duplicate this page, right, and I take this, I say, well, let's see this first by region. So if I bring region to the top, right, I can now see, oh, I was filtered on region. Let me go ahead and clear that filter. Now I can see each of my regions and then drill down within a region, okay? Another thing that's kind of interesting while we're here in edit mode is that, we could go in and just hit a plus tab, right? So if I wanted to look at real quick, what's my revenue by division? So if I go down here to account measures, go to my revenue, and we'll actually grab in here, right? So we can bring our year-to-date revenue, actual amount revenue, just drag that in the canvas, makes it a chart. Let's compare that to our budget year-to-date. And then let's go in here and make this a, maybe it's a by business unit. Grab this, go find our division, and just drop it right on top of the chart. So within a few clicks, we can now actually start making sense of this data. Okay, we can change it to a different chart, maybe make this a, a donut, right? When I do a donut, maybe I want to make my budget a tooltip. So tooltip, when I mouse over one, it shows the other. So this is how users can interact with a report. I can also go back, let's say, to the expenses and say, let me go ahead back to this analysis we just did. Let me duplicate this page. And I can obviously rename these down here by just double clicking and say this is my maybe expenses 2. And let's get rid of a couple of things on this page for a moment. Another thing that we hear a lot of times is, as we're, again, asking this question of why. Why am I over budget? Where is my spend? Right, so we look at this and I look at maybe this grouping of these 3 categories here. And I want to look at this maybe down to the, maybe bring in maybe the business unit, right? So I'll bring our business unit description in here. Let me get rid of the object accounts. And I'm going to just leave my variance to budget. I'll get rid of these others down here as well, okay? So we've got this table, right? We could go, again, pick a different visual. Maybe look at this as a matrix or just a data table, right, or a matrix. We also have this other visual here. There's this whole gallery out here. So if I go to import from file, import from app source, right, you can go in and there's a whole gallery. You can go and find other visuals that you might want to use in your report. You want to obviously check a lot of times that things are certified by Microsoft, so you can use those. An example of a custom visual that is really interesting is this one called narratives. So we've actually already downloaded this one here. So if I go ahead and choose this table and choose this visual, it's going to write a narrative for me. So what does that really mean? So it's mining the data for me and it's going to find those outliers for me. So it's actually doing my job, talked about how do we shave days off of our month-end close process. Well, this might be a way to say, well, geez, rather than me go and spend the next 4 hours trying to find this information, let me just basically hit a couple buttons and see if it's actually what I want, was hoping to kind of get out of it. So for instance, let's call this IS level 6, which is again just an account grouping. Account groupings. We'll go down here to our business unit, and I'll have this as basic business unit, business units. Okay. So that's just how we can relabel the field. So when we're actually reading the context of above, it'll actually refer to things, account groupings, and based on the business unit, here, let's see, let me hit enter there. All right, so now we clicked out of that. So now we can see, okay, so total variance for employee expenses, minus 608,000 across all 38 business units, right? Representing 56% of the total business unit across all 3 account groupings, right? We can come here to the characterizations and do, well, what is it? So this budget amount is a variance to budget. It's money, right? Is that a lot of this good or bad? So you can kind of determine, do I want it to show, is it good or bad? Do I want to aggregate those across? Sure. So you can kind of start tailoring this. And the nice thing is that, now I've got this by division, but we can actually go and say, okay, well, how does this write-up do if I'm just in the Western region? So if I select Western region, it's going to recalculate and reanalyze this data set. So it's going to kind of do some of these findings. Okay, well, we can come in here and, again, select this visual, swap things around, right? Maybe I want to look at just the reverse. And now it'll take by business unit and give me each of those 3 different groups. So you can drag any different fields in here. And so that's just an example where you can use some of this, the machine learning and to go find some insights there. Okay. So the last thing we want to show in this example of a demo is we also have like KPI. So if we were, I'm not going to save this. And we go and look at some general ledger KPIs. We have 17 financial geo ratios that are optional add-ons to the general ledger model. And some of these are around, current ratio, AR turns, inventory turns, days payables, days receivables as examples. And so what these, are nice is that there's some things, a lot of companies have to calculate these on a monthly or quarterly basis. And they're typically done manually, but these are actually calculating and metrics coming out of the model. So these can be as up to date as the data, but you could have it automatically calculate these on last month closed data, right? So you're not getting in the middle of month, inaccurate results here. But the way that we came up with the 17 ratios that we use is through an organization called Risk Management Association, and they analyze these ratios across all companies, all industries. Or not, like I said, all industries, not all companies, but you can actually then say, okay, how do you maybe stack up against, others in your like industry? And so these are the 17 ratios that they seem to use. So we thought, let's go ahead and make those applicable for JDE's customers as well. So the idea here is that I can see if I've got a KPI triggering red, right, that means I'm worse than my target. Let's drill down on that. So now this is, again, an out-of-box sample around some KPIs. We can then drill down here and say, okay, here's my KPI trended over time, right? So my current ratio, I can see here, it just kind of switched. I was doing better to the last couple of months, and then actually just go ahead and do the reverse. And then we take in a current ratio as current assets divided by current liabilities. So you've got each of those in their own little section to then be analyzed. And you can tailor these however you want to be able to answer these questions. I sound like a broken record. Go back to the glossary, maybe how are we doing on maybe inventory turns, right? So I can see here's my inventory turns, or maybe let's go back and look at my days receivables, right? So I can see here I'm running at 42.1 days, which is less than my target of 43.6, which is good, but it is up from 38.7, 6 months before. So again, it's just a matter of. So this is another example. Like I said, normally we'll come in and start from analyzing some high-level key ratios, and then show you how we then do the layers. But for this webinar, we wanted to kind of do the reverse. So I'm going to go ahead and come back to some PowerPoint. So how do we measure time to value, or what's it take to really kind of get started on your journey with something like what you've seen today? In QuickLaunch, it's a lot of elements to kind of get connected because you don't just want something that's not really tailored for your business. And I think that's where that we hope to be is one, your partner on this journey, but also getting the right framework, not only to help you in the short term on your immediate requirements and objectives, but also what your long-term strategy as you go take the next level of your analytics journey when it starts bringing in things more like predictive analytics, prescriptive analytics, and just the more advanced machine learning and AI related stuff. So we think about QuickLaunch as, again, addressing a lot of immediate needs around data visualization and reporting and analytics and BI, but really being that framework. So really, if you look at this as an example of our timeline, and be interested, we can get into specific details around our whole project plan, right? It's very robust, really, but we've done this so many times that we've got this nailed down to a T. But you can see here, configuring different servers required, the foundation, the quick launch, the views, the hierarchy, mapping the tabular models, security, the financial reports, and then we do some knowledge transfer at the end. But it's basically over an 8-week process, and it does take a couple hundred hours to kind of get through this. And we have it broken down as well. We'll actually go to the next slide. What's your investment, right? So the idea would be, it's not just preferred strategies doing everything. We need resources on your side from IT and from finance. And so, based on, different weeks in the process, we have all this detail down. And so we do a project kickoff, everybody knows and can kind of plan accordingly. But here's just an example where, we have it all dialed in. So, there's no really question marks about kind of what it takes to kind of get QuickLaunch, off the ground here. So again, if you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for your time today. And we look forward to seeing you again on an upcoming webinar from Preferred Strategies regarding QuickLaunch. Thanks.